Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So what would you like me to talk about? Okay, the thing that primarily comes to my mind when I see youngsters and young faces before me is that one of the most important things that at a very young age we need to find out and discover is that each one of us, each human being is possessed with some potential, some talent, some ability, and the best thing which parents can do and perhaps an education system can do is to make them discover that basic talent that they have. And there are things which have been developed. There are questionnaires, there are quizzes, there are various applications which make you discover your inner self. So my advice or my sincere suggestion to you youngsters would be that each of you has some abilities which are latent, which are hidden. Some abilities come to the surface, some abilities you very well know of, and they basically constitute your aptitude, your tendency, your inclination towards certain things. So, but you need to find out your inner potential also, because there are a lot of things which are found deep down inside you, which unless you start discovering them, unless you start to finding out some more things about them, they'll stay dormant. So my first request to you would be that you find out the aptitude, find out your inclination, find out your tendency, find out what you like the most. And I think one of the indicators of what you like the most is found in the hobbies that you follow. And the best thing that you can do after that is that please do choose a mission of your life. Make your life meaningful, make your life purposeful. What often happens is that we don't have a mission in life, we don't have a purpose in life, and that is one of the reasons that our lives become directionless, they become meaningless, and often we end up doing things not because of our own passion, but because we see other people doing them, we start following them. So the first request that I'd like to make to you would be that to discover your own inner potential, discover your inner inclination, and then set a goal for yourself, set a purpose, a mission for yourself, and you work for that mission, you work for that goal. And this is the best thing that you can do, not only to improve your own potential, to improve your own qualities, but also to contribute to the society that you live in. So when you work for that inner potential, when you find out your talent, when you find out your purpose in life, this is something which will also make you motivated individuals. This will keep you going. The second thing I'd like to request you maybe is that whenever you find out details about religion being discussed by your parents, and most of your parents are sitting here, so this is a request equally to you and to your parents, that religion should be discussed in a very friendly manner, in a manner in which you are able to find out the reason for why you have to do certain things. For example, if your parents say that you have to eat halal meat, or you have to use the right hand, or you don't have to make friends, or you have if you have to not make friends with the opposite gender, or there are other restrictions which they impose on you, they tell you to fast or they tell you to pray, then you have to ask them that why should I do that? So this question of discussion and this debate, this should be encouraged between the parents and the children. Parents should be well educated, that if they want their children to do something, it should not be because they want to force their opinion on them, but it should be because they would like them to know what the truth is, to inculcate what the truth is, to find out what the truth is. And also whenever you find your parent being harsh on you, or you find them forcing their opinion upon you, you need to maybe politely tell them that, look here, I'm also an individual, I'm also a human being. So when you say I'd have to do something, please let me know the reason, please let me know the wisdom behind it. So I think this is a right that you have, and at the same time the parents sitting here should also understand that instead of imposing their opinion, instead of uttering sentences like this, that do this and do that, and don't do this and don't do that, the proper way would be to tell your children why would they like you to do certain things. So the why is very important, because when you know the why part of an of a directive, you understand why God has asked us to do certain things. Why is it that He wants us to do certain things, and why is it that He wants to stop us from certain things? And this will also make you directly connected to God. You see, when you get connected to God, there is no more powerful a source, there is no more potent of source than the Almighty Himself talking to you. And for that, I'll request you, I'll take you on to the third suggestion that I'd like to make, and that is that always keep a good translation of the Quran handy with you. So even if you are a young child starting with 8 years of age or 9 years of age, all the way up to your teenage, there have been selections from the Quran. There have been books like these which actually introduce you to the Quran. So as youngsters, as teenagers, as pre-teens, the best thing that you can do in order to connect to God directly is to have a good translation of the Quran handy at your bedside. Read it from various portions. And at Al-Mawrid, at our institute, we have published a book which is called Selections from the Quran, and is primarily meant for children and for young readers and for people who are new, who would like to know what the Quran is. Because when you start reading the Quran from the very beginning, at times you don't get the hold of it or the feel of it, because it starts off with the history of previous nations. So it's a better idea to get introduced to the Quran first, have a selection of the Quran, go through them first, and then you start reading the Quran. And the fourth thing that I'd like to probably suggest to you is that I don't think I need to suggest this actually, because the society that you live in is already very sensitive to these things, and that is that you all must take up some community work, some community service, some voluntary work, something which you can do to contribute to the society that you live in. It could be serving at an old home, it could be going to a hospital, it could be an hospice, it could be some charity work, it could be anything which involves you with your society, which tells you that you are people who would like to contribute to the society that you live in. That society has a right on you. There are certain obligations that you owe to that society, and one of the most important obligations is to care for other people, is to look for other people, is to find out how other people are there for you, and never make a distinction in this between Muslims and non-Muslims. You see, humanity is the first bond in which we are all tied, in which we are all brought together as a single family. Adam and Eve, with them began humanity, and all of us are basically progeny of Adam and Eve. So therefore all of us are like one big human family. Whenever you care about other people, don't think that your primary responsibility is to care about people of your own faith or of your own brethren like Muslims. No, that's not the case, because you're human beings first, and then you become Muslims or Christians or Jews or etc. So that bond of humanity must stand. That bond of humanity must bring you together to each other, and that is how you connect with each other. You make friends in your schools of people from all faiths. Don't discriminate with them. Don't think that we Muslims are in any way superior, or we have some particular qualities that others don't have. In fact, it might be the other way around. So in this regard, you have to be very humble in your approach. You have to be very friendly with other people. And finally, I'd also like to suggest to you that whenever you are making friends with people around you, you always have this question regarding cultural interaction, regarding the fact that how do we culturally interact with our non-Muslim brethren. For example, going to their Christmas parties or other functions which seemingly you might seem to think, or your parents might stop you from. So again, here also we need to understand that socially, culturally, mixing up with our brethren, with people who live in these countries, is absolutely a normal thing, and it's in fact something which you should be encouraged to by your parents. The only thing that you must always think is that you have to be a morally strong person, a person who does things while following the conscience that he has or she has. The biggest thing that guides you in your worldly affairs, in your relationships with your friends, is that you have to be a person who acts upon your things, upon your various things, in the light of your own conscience. If your conscience is strong, if your conscience tells you what you do, you just follow your conscience, and that is the best way how you can actually lead a life, you can deal a life. And at the same time, all moral qualities that a person must have or should have, they are found in each and every human being, and that is why they are called universal human values. So never underestimate other people. Never think that these values are something which Muslims are probably the ones who have produced, or they are the ones who are the originators of these values. This is not the case. Humanity is the originator of these values, and humanity always comes first. So always be humble in your approach, never be self-righteous in your approach, never think lowly of others. always think of the qualities of other people, always encourage other people, always play down the faults of other people. And if you have to criticize people, let it be your own self. So you see, criticism is something which comes to us naturally. Every now and then we think of other people, how they are behaving, how they are doing this. But I think the best criticism is self-criticism. So instead of indulging in all sorts of criticism on others, start with your own self, think of your own self, think of your self-improvement. And the best way to improve yourself is through self-accountability. Hold yourself accountable every day, every night. Question yourself, question your deeds, and try that the next day that dawns upon you, you'll become a better individual, a better person, a person who is more responsible, a person who is more trustworthy, a person who is more closer to humanity, a person who is more closer to his parents or her parents. So these are a couple of things perhaps I would like to have suggested to you. But then again, these are just principal guidelines, and I'm sure while living in this society you have a number of questions which relate to the society that you live in, and which also relate to the peculiar problems that you might be facing. And also I would also encourage you that if you feel that your parents are forcing their ideas upon you, or they think that they have to follow certain routines in life which you don't understand, you have all the right to question those routines or those ideas, because parents are also sitting here. I'd request them also that whenever you want your child to follow a certain norm in life or a certain pattern in life, please try to educate him or her. Try to let him or her know the reason behind this. And also, once you communicate yourself to your child, step away. Let go of the child. Let him or her think of the future, because now he or she is a grown-up individual. He or she now knows what right and wrong is. Now he or she has a direct connection with God. You are not going to be responsible for what your child does before God once he has become an adult. So forcing your opinion, like in things like marriage, in things like choosing a career, or in things like wearing clothes, or in things like anything which relates to your own personality, your parents can suggest whatever they would like to, but they cannot force you. You have this right. And I always say this, I might be a little harsh when I say this, but I say this with full responsibility, that whenever parents enforce their opinion upon their adult children, this is no less than a violation of human rights. It's a basic violation of human rights, and I think we must be very careful that we must not infringe the right of others. We ourselves as adults would not like to be dictated. So therefore, also at certain age, when your children becomes adult, they must also not be dictated. I'm not saying that they should not be advised. I'm not saying that you should not suggest to them good things. No, you have all the right to tell whatever you want to tell them, but don't force them to adopt a particular way of life. And the best gift that you can give your child is that you instill in him or her the quest for the truth, the search for the truth, to find out what the truth is. That's the best gift that you can give. And the last thing that I'd like to say in this particular area would be that if you ask me what are successful parents or who are successful parents, I always tell this to my wherever I go, that the most successful parent is that parent, or they are those parents to whom their children come immediately and confess if they have done something wrong. They don't go to anyone else. They don't go to some third person, or even hide their mistake. If you have given your children the trust, the confidence, the level of connection, and if you find your child coming to you and expressing that today I did this bad thing, or today I did this wrong thing, and if you're the first person as a parent, then believe me, you are a very successful parent, because in this particular case you have actually given them the confidence, the trust, in which she or he does not need to hide what she did wrong, nor was she meant to go to anyone else and express this confession. She came to you. So I think as parents who are sitting here, I would advise you, sincerely advise you. I'm a parent myself, and I've made a lot of mistakes in my life regarding rearing children, but what I've learned from my mistakes is that the biggest thing that you can do is to give this confidence to your child that come what may, whatever wrong you will do, I will be there for you. I'll not turn you out of the house, or maybe threaten you, or maybe scold you. So you have to be there for the child when he or she does something wrong, and you have to feel proud when your child comes to you and tells you, Mama or Baba, today I did this something which I was not very happy about, but I spontaneously did something bad. So let us make this a target in our lives, that as parents we'll engender this confidence between us and our children, that they come to us, they are friends to us, they also respect us at the same time, and also we are able to spend some quality time with them in which we can discuss their interests, in which we can know what their problems are. And let me tell you, I have a vast experience in dealing with teenagers. Parents just don't have this idea of the peer pressure that they suffer when they live in Western countries. The amount of pressure that they face when they live in their country, from their school, from their teachers, from their neighbors, from their friends, they have a certain pressure that they feel from them, and this pressure again is because of that cultural clash which seems to occur between us and other people. So parents must realize that their child is already going through a lot. He or she is already suffering at times because of the emotional stress that she's going through or he is going through. So therefore, they have to be very careful. They have to be extra considerate. They have to be extra accommodating, because they would not know that when they're scolding their child, when they're telling him or her off, they are actually causing much more harm, because she or he was internally already perhaps broken, or perhaps in a very stressful situation or a very stressful state. So with these few words, it's entirely up to you now if you have any questions regarding how to behave in the society, especially, and if you think that you need some questions regarding your cultural identity, or maybe how you would feel that living in a country where you seemingly find your parents very, very sensitive towards certain values, towards certain festivities. So if you think that they need to be brought up and discussed, let's make this an open discussion. And let me also assure you that it's not the answers that matter. Maybe I'd not be able to give you a very convincing answer, but the real thing is, let's discuss this thing. Discussion is the most important thing, and with this discussion our minds open up, the minds of the parents open up, and the parents also would come to know the issues that face their children. So let's not run away from issues, because hiding from them, closing our eyes from them is not going to solve those issues. The only way we can solve issues is to sit down on a table, discuss them in a very frank way, and also agree that there are certain areas in which we might not agree. So let's agree to disagree, and also let's give this chance to the children to speak their hearts out, and not go back, when you go back to your homes, and don't please scold them for anything that they said today, or make them remind them of the fact that there is something bad. Because if you want this to be a productive session, if you want this to be a session in which you can really gain something, then you have to speak your heart out, whatever is in your heart. And your parents who are sitting here must listen to your whatever you have to say with an open heart, with a accommodating heart, with a magnanimous heart. Because unless this happens, this free-flowing communication that is the mission of my life, to take place between the children and their parents, is not going to happen. So this is only going to happen if you have to be bold. Whatever you have in your mind, discuss it very boldly. Don't think that your parent is sitting behind you. And if the parent is hearing something which he or she would not like from their child to hear, please don't go back, when you go back to your homes, and tell them off or scold them that why did you raise this point, or why did you discuss this point. So with that, it's now entirely up to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Who would like to go first then?
Just raise your hands.
Yes.
Let's start with
The youngest.
The bravest.
You have to be loud, please. Thank you.
My question is, why did Allah create the world?
Wow, that's a huge question, and I'd rather want Allah to answer it.
Can we repeat the question, please? We haven't heard the question.
So the young lady here asks me that why did Allah create this world? What is the reason that made him create human beings? So my dear, I would have been in a very right situation, or a simple situation, had I found the answer to this question also. My question also is the same, and I'd like this question to be answered by God himself when you go to him. But other than that, the conjecture that I can do, or maybe some speculation that I can indulge in, is that it seems to me that God wants to choose some good people from this world. He wants to find out who are the good people who follow their conscience, who speak the truth, who are righteous, who are just, who are good to their parents, who are compassionate, who are selfless, who have sympathy in them, who are kind, who are caring. He wants to check these people. He wants to sift out these people, and then perhaps when we go to Him in the next world, He wants those special people who have done righteous deeds, who have been good to each other. He wants to assign them a certain mission in that next life, which perhaps as yet we have no knowledge of. But we can perhaps earn that place for Him or towards Him if we behave as good individuals. So my conjecture here is that perhaps the Almighty created this world because He wanted to choose people who are pious, who are righteous, for a bigger purpose, for a higher purpose, which perhaps He will assign us if we land in paradise in the next world. I'm not sure if I made sense to you, but if I have not made sense to you, I'd like you to ask me again. So if you become a good person in this world, if you become someone who people remember when you pass away, then that means that you've done your job, and perhaps you will be selected in the next world by the Almighty to do something very higher, something very exotic, something very extraordinary, which at the moment is hidden from our eyes. He's just making a selection, and those selected people will then be assigned some higher job when we go to Him.
Thank you, sir. Next one. Sorry.
My question is, did Allah have a backstory?
Have a what?
Did Allah have a backstory?
A backstory.
Would you explain that?
Like does Allah have a past? Okay, we don't understand that question. I'll just get another one. Is there any more gods or goddesses?
Okay. So we have been told that there is only one God, and He has created all of us. And we human beings, because of certain misconceptions and because of certain wrong ideas, we start to make up gods, more gods, and we think that there are other gods and goddesses which are, although they can be called lesser gods or lesser goddesses, but they are also answerable to that supreme God. Whereas our religion tells us that there is just one God. We have a direct connection with Him. We pray to Him, we can make dua to Him, we can talk to Him in all sorts of ways. We don't need some mediary, someone to mediate our case with Him. These false gods or these demigods or these semi-gods, as I can tell them, as I can perhaps categorize them, have generally arisen because people think that we cannot reach God directly, and we need someone to plead our case or to make us connect with God. Our religion tells us this is not the case. Each and every one of us can reach Him directly. You can talk to Him, you can present your case to Him. If you have an exam tomorrow, do pray to Him that you could get good grades. So you don't need any other God, you just have one God, and it's as simple as that.
Why is pork forbidden?
That's a very good question. So you see, this relates to the dietary laws, or the laws which religion wants to follow regarding eating. So I'd like to explain it in a little more detail, because this is something which is a very common question, and you're often asked by your non-Muslim friends that why is it that Muslims don't eat pork. Okay, the first thing that needs to be understood is that our eating habits, or whatever we eat, has an effect on our daily routines. So our eating, the manner in which we eat, the things that we eat, they have an effect on your lives. They affect your life routines. So one of the things which the Almighty has stopped us from eating are all those things which can produce savagery, aggression, and things and that temperamental attitude in your own personality. So He has forbidden food which is eaten which is consumed by us in a manner that the things that we consume are those animals which are meat-eating animals, carnivorous animals, and which actually pounce upon their prey to consume them. Like, for example, a lion. a lion normally would tear apart its prey and then of course eat that meat in a very vicious way. So whichever animals produces this savagery, this beastliness in it is forbidden. Now regarding lions, regarding cheetahs, regarding sharks, we are absolutely sure because that these are the animals who are carnivorous in nature. Carnivorous means an animal which eats meat, and not only that, but he eats meat in a way that it tears apart its prey either through its teeth or to the claws that it's given to it. So what happens is that these types of animals, generally our own nature is very clearly tells us that these are the animals that we should stay away from because these are savage beasts and we should not consume them. So no one eats lions in general, no one eats sharks in general. I know shark is a delicacy at some places, but these beasts are not consumed by human beings in general. However, regarding the pig or regarding the swine, we were not absolutely sure whether he is a beast or not, or does he belong to the genre which we call the herbivores, which eat grass, like for example the goat, for example the camel, for example the cow. So the pig is an animal which has both these tendencies. It also tears apart its prey and eats meat, and it also consumes grass at the same time. So it was difficult for us to distinguish whether he is a beast or he's a non-beast which does not consume meat and is like a herbivore, like a goat. The Almighty told us that his beastly nature, his savage nature, is actually more dominant than his herbivorous nature or his grass-eating nature, and therefore it forbade us. If you eat that meat, it will produce that same tendency of savagery in you as well. So the bottom line is that you need to understand that the basic thing which has stopped us, which our religion has stopped us from consuming regarding eating, is all those kinds of things which could produce savagery in us, and most of those things are already known to us through our own instincts. We don't need to go to someone, as I said, no, we don't need to go to someone to find out why lions are prohibited, because of course its savagery is something which is very well known. But there is a case in which this could be of a doubtful nature, in which we are absolutely not sure whether the beastly nature is found in a particular animal or not. In the case of the swine or the pig, this is present. So therefore it produces that aggression, it produces that sort of savagery, or it can produce that, and hence that is why it has been forbidden.
I think we're going in a line. Yes.
I think you don't need to go in a line.
Yeah,
you
because he raised the hand.
Okay. Anyone can ask a question. I think even parents are children to their own parents, so they too can ask a question.
Okay.
We've got a question over there.
Muslims are often seen as fundamentalists and terrorists, so how should we respond to that?
That's another very burning question that you often come across, and I think the best way that you can deal with this question is that you need to educate your own people who ask this question, that people who indulge in this terrorism, people who take to militancy, are primarily marginalized. They do not belong to the mainstream Muslims. It's just as if you have certain criminals, you have people who vandalize, you have people who maybe steal. So if some people steal, if some people vandalize, if some people do wrong things in a whole community, you cannot say that the whole community is also of the same nature. So first you need to tell them that people who commit these terrorist acts, people who are militant, they are not mainstream Muslims. They are deviations from the mainstream. That's the first thing. And the second thing perhaps that you can tell them, and before you tell them you need to educate yourselves as well, is that there are certain verses in the Quran, there are certain ahadiths of the Prophet which seemingly have this harsh overtone. For example, there's a verse in the Quran which says that you strike off the heads of the disbelievers, or there's a verse which says that you make the people of the book as your someone who should subjugate and impose jizya on them. So this is a particular class of directives of the Quran which is mentioned specifically in a specific context, and to a very similar tone are the directives which say that you don't make friends with Jews and Christians. I think this is a very often quoted verse that you'd find your Imam Sahib speaking of, or maybe even your parent doing that. Again, those Jews and Christians which are spoken of in the Quran and which the Quran tells us not to make friends of, were a particular category of Jews and Christians which belonged to the time or the era of the Prophet. And they were the Jews and Christians who were convinced in their hearts, in the hearts of their hearts, that the Prophet is a true prophet. And in spite of being convinced about his veracity, they arrogantly denied him. So that was a particular class in the times of the Prophet which came up and which was pointed out in the Quran. However, the Jews and Christians of today, they are no longer of that category, because we just cannot know whether a particular non-Muslim is denying is denying the truth because he does not know of it, or maybe he has some doubts about it, maybe there's some disinformation about it, maybe the truth has not reached him. So this category of these categories of Jews and Christians, which were actually Jews and Christians of the times of the Prophet who were intentionally denied the truth, they were punished in the times of the Prophet for this denial. Now what happened was that this was a prerogative of the prophets of God only. It cannot be stretched to other periods of time. So these people who call themselves jihadis, who become militant, they start to read these verses of the Quran which have a specific context, which actually relate to the Jews and Christians of the times of the Prophet, and which only relate to the times of the Prophet. And since they think that the Prophet has to be followed in every particular affair, he is like his actions are like uswa hasana to us. So instead of realizing the fact that this is a particular class of directives of the Quran in which we are told that they relate to a specific law of the Almighty which only comes into play in the times of the messengers of God and has no bearing today on us. So this is how we should ourselves educate ourselves and also tell our Muslim brethren, non-Muslim brethren, that first of all, these are people who have been misled. They are marginalized community, and the reason of their this misconception which is in their minds is because they interpret certain verses of the Quran which were specific to the times of the Prophet and stretch it and make them applicable upon themselves also. I know this is a kind of a technical answer. It might be difficult for you to digest, but actually, you see, you need to understand that before you say something to others, you first need to understand yourselves. So, just to recap, this law has been mentioned in the Quran, that people who intentionally deny the truth in the times of the messengers of God. Remember, if I divide history today, I can divide history into two portions. One is the prophetic period from Adam to Muhammad. This is the prophetic period in which prophets of God used to come. And then there is the post-prophetic era, which would last from Muhammad to the Day of Judgment. So now we are living in the post-prophetic era. So there is a specific, I would say, feature of the prophetic era. And that was that people in the times of the messengers of God who intentionally denied the truth but were punished by the Almighty through those messengers because of this denial. And this was meant solely for that prophetic era. Why? Because this would become an argument to the fact that that greater day of judgment is going to take place in the hereafter. That since their judgment took place in this world, and we can simply call it a lesser judgment, it was a lesser day of judgment. So those lesser days of judgment which took place in the times of the messengers of God in their eras and were confined to them was meant to communicate to us people who live in the post-prophetic era that judgment which was made in this world for certain nations by the Almighty Himself is now also going to take place in the hereafter. So it was like an argument in favor of the hereafter. So Quran mentions this as an argument in favor of the hereafter, because we tend to forget the hereafter. The Quran tells us that if you want to know how reward and punishment is going to take place in the hereafter, just look at the life of the messengers of God. This reward and punishment took place in their lives. It's going to take place again when the hereafter comes. But in this post-prophetic era, you can only draw a lesson from that. You can simply not indulge in that. So I think if I had a board, I would have explained it to you that basically it is because of stretching that prophetic era or certain specifications of that prophetic era into that post-prophetic era that has resulted in this problem. And people like Mullah Umar or Osama bin Laden or Mullah Zawahiri or all these people who call themselves Taliban, they actually extract this jihadist or militant philosophy from the Quran, from these verses. So typically what happens is that they would pronounce a verse of the Quran and say that we are following that verse without knowing that that verse was specifically meant for the messengers of God. So if in one word I summarize, I can say that they are basically guilty of playing God. certain things which were the prerogative of God only, and He exercised that prerogative in the times of His messengers. He's going to do that again in the hereafter. But between the hereafter, between the end of the last messenger and till the day of judgment comes, there is an era in which this law does not apply. This law of the messengers is specific to the to the era of the prophets, so that you can always make it an argument in favor of that greater day of judgment. That is all. The problem was that those directives were stretched into that post-prophetic era. I am saying or trying to explain this because you can understand yourself that this is how the Quran presents this whole argument, and you can tell them that people who have become jihadists or have been misled, although they are minority, but they also draw their arguments from the Quran, from a certain part of the Quran which was specific to the messengers of God, and have unfortunately stretched them in this era. If you have any more questions, it's slightly technical, I understand, but I could have gone on to explain, but simply you need to understand that there are certain verses of the Quran which have a specific context and which cannot be stretched beyond that context, and we have been guilty of stretching that particular context and starting it to relate to us as well.
Who wants to go next then?
Okay.
The brave ones.
Brave hearts.
Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to ask, why was the Quran created?
Why was the Quran to guide us? You see, there are certain things that our own intellect, our own person, our own nature tells us what right and wrong is. Our own conscience tells us what right and wrong is. But there are certain things which we might not be guided from our intellect. Like, for example, how should we worship God? How should we connect to Him? How is that God connection going to take place? Now, this is a thing which our own intellect is unable to discover. Contrary to many other things which our own intellect can easily find out, our own conscience tells us what right and wrong is, our own conscience tells us what justice is, but there is a certain area in which our own intellect is not sufficient to tell us, and that is the area in which we connect ourselves to God primarily. So the Quran gives us this guidance. It tells us, it reminds us of a lot of things, but at the same time it tells us how can you connect to God in a way in which God wants you to connect to Him, because that's our own need. Of course, if there was no God, the Quran would not have been revealed and this need would never have arisen. It is because this need is there that we need to connect ourselves to God, and because we are not able to discover for our own selves how we can connect to God. And if you know the history of the human beings, you'll find out that people have tried various things to connect to God. Some people have gone into hiding, people have given up this world completely, they have forsaken this world, and they think this is the only way to connect to God. So there are a lot of imbalances which have resulted in this human behavior because they don't know what's the method to connect to God. So the Quran tells them that this is the way that you need to connect to God, and this is how God would be happy if you connect to God Him in this way.
Go on.
If all Muslims follow obviously one Quran, why are there so many different groups? or sects?
Okay, this happens, you see, when you try to...
If you repeat the question,
Okay.
it doesn't reach everybody.
Okay, so she has asked this question that if there is one Quran, so why is it that Muslims differ in its interpretation? Supposedly, if the Quran is one, people should have the same understanding also. But why is it that people have different understanding? So the reason for that is that as far as the translation of the Quran is concerned, we have very few differences in opinion. It is only when we start explaining the Quran according to our interpretation do these differences result. So if you are a student of science, for example, you'll find out that to understand certain things there are theories. So there is a theory of matter, there is a theory of science regarding everything, and this theory, in these theories we have a difference of opinion between two scientists, because when they interpret a certain process they apply their own concepts and then interpret it. So in a very similar way, when people start to understand the Quran, they start to interpret the Quran, they do it through their own minds, and at times the principles which they apply in that interpretation are different for you and me, because you might be having a different concept while interpreting the Quran and I might be having a different concept. So since when we go to the Quran we understand it differently, that is one of the reasons that we end up with different interpretations. Other than that, there are several other reasons also. For example, at times there is this notion amongst Muslims that unless they understand the Quran through some external source, like for example history, like for example hadith, they just cannot come to the right meaning themselves. They need someone's support, like for example the hadith or history. So each group of people might invoke a particular hadith to understand a particular Quranic verse, which might be different from another hadith which also relates to the same verse. So your path towards reaching the same verse, since those paths become different, the understanding also becomes different. But it should not be a cause of alarm. You see, the thing that you need to understand is that difference of opinion should not be a cause of alarm. What should be actually our concern is that whatever we understand, whatever we interpret, should satisfy our own intellect. People can have different intellects, but I am liable to God on the basis of what my understanding is, what I understand. So you need to understand certain things, and when you need to understand those certain things, they have to be based on certain arguments. So if you find 2 or 3 people saying different things about the same verse, what you do is, as a person who seeks the truth, that you find out the reason or the arguments of each group which says certain things about that particular verse, and then you can easily judge and decide what to your own intellect, what to your own understanding is more convincing. It should not be on the basis of convenience, it should be on the basis of your intellect. And people often say that how can we give preference to 3 or 4 opinions of scholars when we ourselves are not scholars? This is a question which often arises. Now the answer to this question is that this is actually is again something of a misnomer, because you don't have to be a scholar to decide between 3 or 4 scholars. And this is very similar to how, for example, you go to a doctor or you go to a couple of doctors for the same ailment, and you can discuss the ailment of your child or with your own self, of which if it has struck your own self, with a doctor, and different doctors can have different prescriptions for you, and you yourself are not a doctor. But in spite of the fact that you are not a doctor, by speaking to 3 or 4 doctors which prescribe you, you can still make sense that which of these 3 or 4 doctors is more convincing to you. So in a similar way, you don't need to be a scholar to distinguish between the opinions of 3 or 4 people who have conflicting views. So if there is a difference of opinion, yes, there is going to be a difference of opinion, but you should not be anxious or not be worried because of this difference, because what you're going to do is you're going to study that difference and then make up your own mind.
सर ये ना मुझे एक सवाल इसमें मैसेज किया है,
बिल्कुल ठीक है।
सवाल है, सवाल it's very simple. The question is that where is God? We've been told that there is a God, and then we say if you are good you will go to heaven, if you're not good you might go to hell. Where is heaven? Where is hell? It's just myth. We can't see anything. Why we can't see that?
Okay, let's start off with God. You cannot see God, you cannot touch God, but you can experience God. So it's much the same way that whenever you see smoke coming out of somewhere, even if you don't see the fire, that smoke tells us that, well, there is going to be fire even if I don't see it. So we recognize God not by seeing Him. Just as we don't always say that unless I can see the fire, the smoke is not enough for us to be convinced that there is a fire. So we understand the Almighty, we see Him through His work, through His production, through His creativity. He has created us, He has created this universe. We find His reflection in this universe. We find He behaves in a certain way. We find that at times when we pray to Him, our prayers are answered. We find that this universe that we find ourselves in has certain unexplained phenomena which are a mystery to us and which cannot be explained unless we think that there is someone who has actually brought that universe into being. So these are some of the questions which arise in our minds, which may lead us in a very similar manner, that when we see smoke coming out of somewhere, we actually believe that there's going to be a fire even if we don't see the fire. Another good example is gravity. All of us know there's a force of gravity which pulls us down towards earth, but we have never seen gravity. Heavy, none of us has. But we still, in spite of that, all of us say that there is a force of gravity which pulls us to the earth, and there is this scientific explanation for that. So when we say that there is a God, It's not that we are going to we tell our children that we have someone to show them in order to make them believe that there is a God. God is there because there are certain undeniable proofs of His existence. As far as heaven and hell are concerned, they are yet to be made. They are yet to be made. The Quran tells us that this stuff that we see today, one day it shall be converted into a new world, which is the afterworld, the hereafter, and then heaven and hell will be made. So today heaven and hell don't exist. They exist as a future entity that's going to come into being. The Quran at one place says that this world, these heavens and these earth shall be reshuffled and then converted into a new world in which hell and heaven will be there, and then people will either end up in hell or they'll end up in heaven. So God is always there. However, hell and heaven are yet to come into existence.
The second question, that we've been told that there is one God and He basically give us the religion. So all the religions are same, basically one after other. But if there is one religion and everybody is following that one religion, why Muslims have to cover them so much? And we can see that Christian or other religion, they don't cover them that much.
Cover what?
Cover the ladies, especially from
Actually, you're talking about the dress.
dress code.
Okay, so that's another question. Maybe we can discuss that separately. But first of all, that we need to understand is, as far as divine religions are concerned, which means religions which have been revealed by the Almighty, they have always been the same. They have always brought down the same guidance. And you know what? It's said in the Quran that Abraham, our forefather, he actually kept the name of his progeny, the name of his children, as Muslim. We know that Jews, Christians, and ourselves, we are his progeny. We belong to we are his descendants. So he kept the name of all his descendants as Muslims. So the first thing that we need to dispel is that Muslims, Christians, and Jews, in fact, are all Muslims, because the Quran says that this is how Abraham named them. The words of the Quran are, Huwa sammakumul muslimin. It is He who named all of you as Muslims. So the Jews of their times, the Christians of their times, and we of our times, we have always been called as Muslims by the Almighty. Now what happened is that in each instances of time, in each eras of time, we have various books of God being revealed to these various denominations so that they could obtain guidance from them. And over a period of time, the teachings of these previous scriptures have become adulterated, they have become mixed up. So a final book was revealed in the form of the Quran, and the guidance of the Quran was actually preserved contrary to the other books of God. So therefore, when we say that we have a reason to follow the Quran, the only edge, and I am saying this with a lot of stress, that we have a lot of similarity between the Bible and the Old Testament and the New Testament and the Quran. A lot of similarity. I can point out a lot of verses which are common. And if there is any adulteration or any interpolation which has taken place, it's not primarily in the Bible, it's more in Bible history. Now, the only edge which the Quran has over the previous scriptures, if someone asks you that how are you different from us, if some Christian asks you, if some Jew asks you, the answer that you can give him or her in a very safe way, in a very reliable way, is that the book of God that you have is preserved in its original language, in its original content, and there has not been the slightest alteration in that book ever since it was revealed. And so therefore you can rely on that book as far as you can in interpreting that book. Contrary to this, the previous books like the Old Testament, the New Testament, which we call the Torah and the Injil, we do not have them in their original format. All we have are translations. We have basically translations of those books and translations of translations. So therefore, although they still have a lot of truth in them, but the accuracy is lacking. So therefore, it's like having the final edition of God, the final version of God which He has revealed. He revealed the Old Testament, He revealed the New Testament, and now we have the final Testament. So the difference between ourselves and the previous religions is that we have the final word of God, and that has been preserved in the original language, and that is the only edge which Muslims have. Other than that, as far as guidance is concerned, let me tell you that the Quran at one stage when it was being revealed, it actually told the Christians that please go and receive a verdict from your own book. You don't need to come to the Quran unless you become Muslims. Till the time that you remain Christians, wal yahkum ahlul injil bima anzalallahu alayhi. You must reveal, you must follow the New Testament. This is what the Quran is telling the Christians, that unless you come and become Muslims, then you follow the Quran. But prior to that, as long as you remain Christians, please follow your own scripture. So just to cut short this long story, this is the reason that we are to rely on the Quran. Now the question comes up regarding your clothes, regarding your own modesty, regarding how you have to follow that modesty. Let me tell you, our clothing was never different, or is very little in difference with what the Old Testament already has. Don't think that what today's Christians are following is the Old or New Testament, because they are not following the Old and New Testament in their spirit. Had they followed that, and I can show you from their previous nations or the previous generations, in which when they followed them their own scriptures, they were actually covering themselves very much like the Muslims, and it was very similar. It's only that because we don't have some of the verses still intact the way we find them in the Quran, that we find this change. And to find out more about Christianity, also let me tell you that today what these Christians are following is called the Pauline Christianity, or the Christianity which was actually put forth by Paul, Saint Paul. And Saint Paul, what he did is he actually revoked many of the verses of the Bible, and he said that for non-Israelites we have a different law, and for them the Sharia, or the book, or the divine law, stands abrogated. They are not liable to follow it. So this is the reason that today we find a lot of Christians, they simply don't follow the Bible, because Saint Paul has told them that they are not liable to follow this religion, because that religion which is found in the Old Testament was primarily meant for the Israelites, for the people who came before them. And hence, if they follow certain other rules, and if they just follow that Jesus was actually crucified on the cross, and that I have faith in this crucifixion, then I will receive salvation. So they don't have to do righteous deeds the way it was prescribed by the Bible. As far as they are good people, and they believe in Jesus being the Son of God, and the fact that he was killed on the cross, or executed on the cross, or crucified, and if you have this belief that he has actually come and given this sacrifice for the whole of humanity, and the rest of the humanity just needs to believe in him, that this was done as a fact to sort of ameliorate us, to emancipate us from our sins. So this is how they work, and that is the reason that since the divine law has been taken away from them, that they don't follow the original Torah at the moment. Otherwise, if they start following the original Torah, they'll be very close to what we Muslims are, because our Quran and the original Torah, as I said, the only difference between the two is of text and translation. We have the text and they have the translation, and otherwise they are very close to each other. I'm sorry I had to go in more detail to answer this, because each question has a very big background, and if you don't maybe understand it, I'm always there after this session. You can always email me or ask me on the phone or a WhatsApp message if you need any more clarification.
Shazad ko thodi si break dete hain until we wait for him. We are giving you a pen and paper if you want to write your email address or your phone number, because Shazad Salim sir also do on the Facebook and then Facebook Live and the other program, and he can send his own writings, or his own recordings to the WhatsApp group, or through the email as well. We can send it to you. So we just giving this, if you want to, if you like to. It's not compulsory, but we just go through go around, and then if you want to write it down, your name and your email address or your phone number.
Maybe I can ask a couple of related questions while they actually write down their contact information. So what you were just talking about, I'll ask a couple of related questions. Number one, are we saying that Prophet Adam wasn't a Muslim? And number two, I mean, it seems relatively easier to talk about Jews and Christians because we also believe in Moses and Jesus. But in this country, for example, we do live with, we go to school with, we get exposed to or work with Hindus as well, who believe in many gods. So what should our attitude be towards them?
So our attitude, you've made a good point here, because it's not just the Jews and the Christians that you come across in this part of the country. We have people following other religions, and two big religions which come to my mind are not only, one of them is of course Hinduism and the other is Buddhism, and of course both cannot be called divine religions, so to speak, as the Quran calls the people of the book. So again with them also the principle that you have to follow is pretty much the same, and that is that you must not cut yourself off with them from them. It's not that they are people who are who you should actually not make friends with, or they are someone who would actually be you would be told not to interact with them. No, as human beings you need to establish the same parity, the same rapport with all sorts of people. Whether you're talking about Hinduism and Buddhism, I'll go a step further and I'll say even with people who are atheists, who don't believe in a God, people who are agnostics, who don't think that God is a possibility, even for such people it's not that we should cut ourselves from them. You see, the bond of humanity is the basic bond that we need to uphold, and every person has a right to hold a view. So what best you can do is you can discuss the views of the child or the person that he's expressing that view, and express your own view, and let him reflect on your own what you think is the right, and also reflect regarding what he's telling you. So it has to be a mutual exchange, it has to be a discussion, it has to be a debate. And if you don't have this mindset of imposing your view on the other, if you don't have this mindset of arguing with the other person and telling him off that you're going to end up in hell in the hereafter, I think that is sufficient. It's like humanity coming together and exchanging views on particular topics that interest you, and not forcing your view on the other person.
So regarding the first question, was Prophet Adam also a Muslim?
Of course he was. The very first Muslim was created as a Muslim. The very first person to be created on earth was a Muslim, and this continued. This is how we have been told in the Quran. When I said that Abraham has actually specified his ummah or his people who follow him to be specifically Muslims, it actually names them as Muslims. As far as the spirit of a Muslim is concerned, we have other verses in the Quran. For example, there's a verse which says, "Inna Deena Indallahi al-Islam," that religion to God has always been Islam. So therefore, followers ever since Adam to Muhammad have always been the followers of Islam, and hence the followers themselves have to be categorized as Muslims. जी
आप पूछें please.
Sometimes I've gone to music clubs just because I have a net
Music classes, right?
And my Muslim friends tell me that it's haram to listen to music. Is this true?
Right. So this is also a very common issue that might arise. Okay, I'm sorry. The question this young man has asked is that at times you have to attend music classes in your school, and when he does so, he is actually told off by his friends that music is haram in Islam, and therefore you should, if you're doing something, if you're attending a music class, you're doing something which is not approved by the Almighty. Now, as far as music is concerned, first of all, you see, before I actually even answer the question, there has to be this change which must be brought about amongst ourselves, and that is that if you ask someone, or if someone tells you that okay, this is haram and this is halal, the first question I think that you need to ask him back perhaps is, okay, is it? Please show me where. You see, what happens is that a lot of things come along in the label of Islam, not because someone has actually researched them or correctly ascribed them to its source, but because they have heard them. So it's more of a hearsay. So the first thing that you might ask your friend is, just to get him educated and get yourself educated as well on that particular issue, is okay, if you tell that music is haram, okay, I'll accept it if I find it in the Quran, or if I find it in a hadith or a direct of the Prophet. So what you do is that you immediately tell that person to please go back and bring some source which tells you so. So I can tell you from my own study that as far as the Quran is concerned, there is not a single verse in the Quran which even discusses music directly in whatsoever. There's not a single verse in the Quran. So the first thing that should come to your knowledge is that the Quran has not even discussed music. How can it prohibit music? What it has not discussed, how can it prohibit in the first place? The next is the issue in which you'll find certain hadiths of the Prophet discussing this particular issue. And if you gather all those ahadith and if you collate all of them, you'll find out that what actually was the case was that people would drink liquor in gatherings of music, they would sing and dance and go wild and go out of control, and then in this state of inebriation they would do all sorts of things. So basically it was said that if this is the issue, that you're going to make a hue and cry and drink in these gatherings, then please stop doing that. So primarily it was not the music which was prohibited in those times, it was primarily because music came with those vulgar songs and dances which accompanied that thing. So therefore what we can derive is that as far as music is concerned, if it is not vulgar, if it does not stimulate your base emotions, if it's based on normal tunes that we often come across, it bears no label of prohibition. It is only something which is immoral, something which is vulgar, something which is base, has something which stimulates our bad emotions, which can be turned as something that we should abstain from. Other than that, there are so many songs that we sing, there are so many there are several things that we sing. They have a very refreshing effect on us. They in fact relax us, they in fact entertain us. So as long as there is no vulgarity in them, as long as there is nothing of any polytheistic tendency in them or some innovative thing in them, the Quran or the Hadith, they have not prohibited them at all. As I said, the ahadith which prohibit them actually refer to their wrong use. And the Quran, as far as the Quran is concerned, there is not a single verse which mentions its prohibition. The ahadith mention it, but again they mention the wrong use of the particular narrative. And just to explain you, just to give you an example, we can use a knife to kill a person, and we can also use a knife to cook food. So it's basically the wrong use of the knife that is prohibited, not the knife itself. I cannot say that knife is prohibited because it's going to kill people. No, I can even cook food and make food or prepare food through it. So it's basically the wrong use of a thing which at times makes that thing prohibited. So if you're going to wrongly use music, or you can use hear music which might have a bad effect on you, so that is the area in which you have to be careful of.
Thank you, sir. Yes, go on.
Yeah. Why are tattoos haram?
They are not. Who said so? You can wear all kinds of tattoos. You see, there is a certain hadith which people think that it relates to tattoos, and if you study that hadith in the light of the Quran, you'll find out that there were certain tattoos being made in the times of the Prophet which would actually portray gods and goddesses or evil practices, and that they would be actually etched upon your body. So it was those types of tattoos which were actually prohibited. As far as normal tattoos are concerned, it's entirely your choice. You can make them. Your parents might not like them, or you might not like them, but it's your own choice. Only tattoos which have they may be vulgar tattoos, or maybe tattoos which have something in the nude, of course, which we would never condone, or in the times of the Prophet, as the tattoos were, they actually depicted certain gods and goddesses and certain polytheistic practices. So if you are actually not doing any of these, you can actually wear any sorts of tattoos. And I'd also advise your parents that your parents can, maybe if they don't like tattoos, they can just tell you know of their suggestion or their advice. But if you insist that you'd like to wear a tattoo, you have all the right to do so.
Thank you, sir.
I will extend that question, please, brother. Sir, no, it's concerning this particular question.
Right.
Otherwise, we will stop. If I'd like to make a comment and clarify it myself. If you're talking about tattoo concerning a girl on the tattoo, depend the tattoo is going to be there forever or not. Number one. Secondly, somebody else, maybe the later part of your life when you get married, you think that will be fashionable in those times or not. So you got to see what effect that tattoo is going to have for the future. So that will be a main concern to make that choice. Either long term
Again, you see, if a person makes that choice out of his own will, the point that I'm trying to make is that it is not prohibited. You see, prohibition is something which is one thing, and the wisdom of doing something is another thing. So you can teach your children the wisdom behind it, but again, as I said, in many other cases, you cannot enforce your wisdom. What you can enforce, or what you can really be strict about, is regarding tattoos which have this either vulgarity or some polytheistic tendency in them, like for example depicting gods and goddesses, or all sorts of deities, like for example they would depict Satan, and you know that Satan worship is a cult now. So everything which takes you, which either leads you towards polytheism or to some vulgar thing, those are the tattoos which were prohibited in the time of the Prophet. Other than that, it's your own choice. Of course, you should exercise that choice with your wisdom, with a lot of other sagacious things. But as far as etching them or making them is concerned, it is the choice of the individual.
Yes. Our children got loads of questions, and they should ask, because you have the time now for another hour and a half. But I have to announce that in another 5 to 10 minutes, the food will be ready. And
then all questions will be finished.
For the time being.
Because you'll get the answers.
For that time. What we do, inshallah, all the men will go downstairs. We have mosque, we will read namaz, and children and ladies will start the food, and if they want to offer, if they want to come to the mosque, they will welcome. Or we can put arrange here, they can read namaz here. So then we have about half an hour, 45-minute break, which we have food and namaz, and then we'll start this again. And I think some of them, they want to go to watch football as well, and they are obviously they are allowed to go
of course.
after the food.
What about myself? Can I also go?
Yes, sir. You can. We will record them.
Okay.
For you. So yes.
How do you know all of this?
Oh, how do you know?
The question is,
how do you know all of this? Well, I try to read, try to understand. I have many teachers. You have a teacher. Do you have a teacher when you go to school? Of course. Okay. Which subject you like the best? Which subject do you like the best?
Art and maths.
How do you know art? How do you know art?
Because I study it.
So that's the same reason that I also study it from a teacher, that I know what I have just been telling you. It's much the same. You see, knowledge is always transferred through your teachers, through the institutions that you study in, through the school that you go through. So if you know about art, if you know about painting, if you know about football, anything that has been taught to you by your teacher, the process is pretty much the same. I know what I know because I have learnt it from my teachers or have studied it from other books. The process is always the same.
so can I answer this question, because I know as well, because I witnessed it.
Okay.
Dr. Shazad Sahab, he is an engineer actually. He done the engineering from Engineering University Lahore, and after that he chose to study the Quran and the Islam. And from the last nearly 30 years, he has been very hard worker. I know he's very hard worker, hard working, studying this all these years, and that's why I think he is possibly answer your question. Yes, that girl, she's very sharp, very good, mashallah.
In the Quran lesson, the Quran teacher said that we were not allowed to draw faces.
Will not?
We were not
Allowed to draw faces.
Yeah, that's the same reason as, for example, I was just discussing regarding the prohibition of music. Now, there are certain, again I'll have to sort of try to dilute it, but there are some misunderstood sayings of the Prophet which seemingly tell us that we should not actually draw faces of living people, because when we do so, we might be imitating God, and it's not a good practice to imitate God. That is what people think. However, in my humble opinion, these narratives from which this prohibition has been derived have an entirely different meaning. People in the times of the Prophet used to draw faces of gods and goddesses they used to worship. So therefore they were told that please don't draw these faces or don't make these statues, because these are statues and pictures of other gods which don't exist. lesser gods. There's only one God. And you would understand that the primary message of Islam, or in fact of every divine religion, is to preach the fact that there is only one God. So therefore anything which takes you away from that one God would automatically stand prohibited. So in the times of the Prophet, these images, these drawings were made of other gods which were actually prohibited. And it was because of this prohibition that people thought that making all sorts of faces is prohibited or is forbidden. Whereas actually in his times of the Prophet, only those pictures were forbidden which were made of gods and goddesses, because there was always a chance that if you make a picture of gods and goddesses, you will end up worshipping them. So I'm sure your teacher would have this reason, and maybe if I get a chance I can talk to her, but I can tell you where she's coming from. She thinks that living beings should not be made, because she thinks that the hadith which tells us actually stops us from making these living beings, whereas the hadith which actually tells us what she's derived in fact tells us that in the times of the Prophet, drawings were made because ultimately they would be made of angels, of gods, and they would be worshipped. And of course I would not like to worship any of these drawings, except I would like to worship God. So that is what the Prophet stopped us from. But unfortunately, instead of understanding what he said, we ended up prohibiting all sorts of pictures, which is not the case. But don't argue with your teacher.
I think we'll have a break now. We'll do the mass, and children and ladies can start. The food is ready. The teacher's gonna. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ali, what are you doing?
The lecture there. Okay, now I'm going to speak something.
So I think we have the question again. Please.
How do you be more of a patient person, and how do you control your anger if you're angry at something?
Oh, that's a wonderful question.
How do you control your anger? That's the
So
question.
anger management is a very important thing, and also let me first point out that anger in itself is not always a negative emotion. For example, if you get angry when you see someone being oppressed, for example, if you feel angry when you feel that someone is being unnecessarily being scolded by someone, these feelings of anger naturally arise in you. So it's not always that anger is a negative emotion. It is the way in you express your anger is the real thing. So in order to manage your anger, I would suggest there are two measures that you can take. One is the short time measure and one is the long time measure. As far as the short time measure is concerned, and this is by the way for adults as well, because anger is something which is across the board. It's not just youngsters who get angry, all of us get angry. So the tips that I'm going to mention here basically relate to short term measures and for long term measures, and apply to both children and adults as well. So the first short term measure is that, in fact the only short term measure which has various aspects, is that you try to delay your reaction. When you get angry, your blood starts to boil, the adrenaline starts to pump in, and you want to say something immediately or do something immediately. So what is advisable is that you delay your reaction. And how can you delay your reaction? By changing your posture, by taking a few deep breaths, by leaving that place wherever that situation takes place. And even if you find that these steps are not helping you, you can go into a room and pick up a bat and start hitting the bed maybe or a cushion, so that physical release takes place, not on someone, maybe on a sofa or a cushion. So the first thing that needs to be appreciated is that this is a short term measure in which the whole focus is to delay the reaction as much as you can. So it's just a 10-second or a 15-second burst in which you have to control yourself, because once you cross that peak, that 15% burst, it's all downhill. It'll be easier for you then to express yourself. So the short term measure is, as far as you can, plan in advance. It's not that you're going to be not angry at the time that you get angry. So in order to manage your anger, you have to suggest to yourself, it's called auto-suggestion, that whenever I'm going to get angry, I'm going to delay my reaction. I'm going to stop for a while. I'm going to breathe. I'm going to say words like, God give me patience, God give me patience, something to that effect, which actually is just an excuse to make that reaction period longer. You can say anything. I mean, any word will count, because that will stop you from immediately expressing yourself. So, as far as the long-term measures are concerned, this is a short-term measure. The long-term measure are concerned, they basically revolve around imagining the situation beforehand and then suggesting to yourself that whenever the situation arises, whenever the time of crisis arises, I am not going to show my temper. I am not going to do this. Now, this is a psychological gimmick. When you start suggesting to yourself certain things and just talking to yourself, they have a very imperceptible effect on you, because when the time comes, you will feel that what you had suggested to yourself has had its impact. And when you say that I'm not going to get angry, I'm not going to get angry, I'm not going to get angry, when actually the time of anger arrives, you actually recall those sentences, that look what I said to myself, look what I said to myself, and it does happen that it does help you. So the first thing is that always plan in advance that how you're going to react. The second thing which is very important is that, you see, generally we are prone to extremes because our threshold for anger is very, very close to the surface. And the reason for that is that generally we are not relaxed individuals. We are in a state of tension most of the time when we are not even angry. Even when you are not angry, we are tense. So the second important thing is that in order to circumvent this anger, this particular threshold should be decreased. And you know how it can be decreased? A very good mode for this decrease is that you must do physical exercise. Some form of physical exercise is essential, because that is what's going to relax you. And when you get relaxed, your threshold drops, the buffer increases, and it will take time for you to get angry. Since that buffer is in normal situations is always very short, we find that we get angry even at small things, very, very small, many minor things which we would, ignore in ordinary circumstances. So the second suggestion would be that you should actually do this workout, this physical release, which actually helps you to relax. Or I can even suggest this, that if it's not possible for any physical release, then anything which relaxes you, anything which makes you calm down, which makes you enjoy. Do something for 15 minutes, half an hour, 1 hour every day, which makes you a relaxed individual. I say a workout, I say an exercise, because exercise and workouts and sports and games, they actually are a means to spend your extra energy, and they build that threshold, and that they build that buffer zone. And the third thing that might help you in this regard is that you need to realize that things always take time. You see, one of the reasons that we get angry is that we don't get expected results, and we actually get annoyed that why aren't results coming to our expectation. So here we have to understand that there is a scheme of God in which everything takes place in a certain manner, gradually at times, and at times in its own sequence. So we have to trust God that if things are not happening according to our plan, then at least they're happening according to God's plan, and that's perhaps better for us as well. And finally, I say that even if all these measures fail, the short terms one fail, the long terms one fail, then what does it result into? Of course, you'll say something, you'll utter something, maybe hit someone, maybe abuse someone. So once you do that in anger, and all these long term and short term measures were not able to help you, then still the first thing that you should do is go to that person and apologize and say that I have done something wrong. If I have said something in anger, if I have said something which has actually offended you, I am sorry for that. So always take the initiative, the lead in apologizing, because saying sorry might make you feel low in the eyes of that person, but it will always elevate you in the eyes of God. And always think that saying sorry for something that you did wrong is always a very, very commendable thing to do. So in spite of these measures, if you're able to do that you're able to go and say sorry and make amends, then the next time you'll be much more careful, because it's not easy every time to go and say sorry to a person again and again. So that itself will be a stopping point for you. It will be a deterrent for you. So these are some of the measures, and I'm sure that you can search more on the internet, because anger management is a very specialized psychological field which has been researched into a lot. And just as I suggested to you a couple of measures, these measures are suggested by the psychologists as well. And I'll just add one more thing, and that is that once a person came to the Prophet, our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he asked him that, please advise me about something, please counsel me, koi mujhe nasihat kare. And you know what he said? La taghzab, gussa na karo, don't be angry. And that person once again repeated his request, and he said ke mujhe koi aur nasihat kare, please give me some other advice. And the Prophet said, La taghzab, gussa na karo. And the third time he asked, and even at the third time the Prophet replied the same and said, La taghzab, gussa na karo, which actually meant that this anger is something which often takes the better of us. So repeatedly he actually counseled the person who had come to him in question that the best thing that you can do is to stop being angry. And at another point he has beautifully compared this anger to something, and he said that a person who is strong is not the person who defeats someone in a fight by throwing him down like a wrestling match, but a person who is strong is really the person who actually controls his anger. So strength is not the strength in which you defeat a person by wrestling him and throwing him down, but real strength is the strength in which you are able to control your emotions and your inner self.
You said that the Prophet communicated to Allah, but then how do we, if we can't see Allah, then how do we know that Allah exists or that we can communicate?
As I said, that you see, there are a lot of things that you cannot see. You cannot see the force of gravity. You cannot see a number of things, but you believe them because you know there is some undeniable proof about them which exists. So although you cannot see God, because you see, when you see someone, that is the easiest way to believe in something. That is the easiest way. The more intellectual way to believe in something is not to demand something to be seen from the eyesight, but because of certain signs. A lot of scientific phenomena are there in which we believe because they are arguments in favor of that scientific phenomena. There are many things which can be explained in science. So God himself chose to be not in front of us so that he could test us whether we could recognize him by his creation, by his attributes, by how he has made this universe for us. Look at our own body. I mean, it's so perfect a thing that even if slightly a small thing deviates from its place, we get all sorts of diseases. Look at the perfect way in which we breathe. Look at the way that when we breathe and our heart beats, it's like a pumping machine which never gets tired. But imagine a toy which has a lot of batteries, which of course moves about. After about 15 days or 100 days or 20 days, you would need a battery replacement. Imagine a toy which you have in your chest, which is called the heart. It keeps on beating and beating and beating and beating for 70 years, for so many years, for so many people. And that is going on involuntarily. It's going on through a mechanism which we don't know. It's just happening. So there's so many things that we look and realize and see that they can only happen if we have some exterior force, if we have someone who is actually managing them, who is actually behind them, who is actually administering them. So that is how we understand God.
Thank you. Yes, please.
What do Muslims think of Jesus?
Score बताते रहिएगा.
0-0.
Right.
Sorry, say again.
What do Muslims think of Jesus?
Well, Muslims think about Jesus. Her question is regarding this, what Muslims think about Jesus. Well, they think about Jesus as they think about Moses, as they think about Abraham, as they think about other prophets, that he was a prophet of God, and he came just before Muhammad, peace be upon him, about 600 years before him, and he has to be believed, and therefore his teachings, as far as they are in accordance with the Quran, closer to the Quran, they shall be obeyed. He shall be respected. We will read the Bible wherever we find the words of Jesus, because he was a prophet of God, and we do understand that whatever he talked about he must have talked about from God. So we'll give him all sorts of respect. We'll try to make friends with people who are followers of Jesus. So you see, everything which concerns Jesus will become our concern. Jesus had followers, we'll also make friends with his followers. Jesus gave a book which is called the New Testament. We will also revere that book, respect that book, and read that book. So Muslims think that Jesus was a prophet of God, was a messenger of God, just as Muhammad was a messenger of God, and therefore respect and therefore making friends with people who follow him, all of them is something that we must do.
Thank you. Yes?
I was wondering, how was our language Urdu created?
How was
How was Urdu created?
Urdu,
Yeah.
the Urdu language? Wonderful. Well, actually, what you can probably know is that human beings, when they were born initially, when there was no language, they started to speak to each other by actually referring to various objects. By, for example, there was no name for a glass, there was no name for a table, there was no name for things. They started to point towards things and started to convey the actions that you're going to do with that thing. For example, if I was born and languages were yet to be created and I could see a glass and I would feel thirst in myself, I would point to that glass, maybe pour some water in it, drink it, and the next time that I get thirsty, I would make the same gesture and tell someone, if he's also thirsty, well, there's a glass, put something into it, then drink it. So you make those things through your action, as if you're speaking in sign language. Now this sign language gradually develops into oral languages, in which you actually start saying words. For example, you start calling this glass water, and pour water, drink water. So actions always emanate from things by imitating them. Now, of course, you can ask the question that if this is so simple, then why there are so many different languages? There should have been one language. The reason for that is that men spoke the way they did speak by spreading out when humanity was born into various areas, into various territories, and for each territory, the way you would ask them to drink water, for example, would have a different pronunciation, would have different words in telling them. When I was, for example, if I were born in England and there was no one to speak English to me, I would speak in a certain dialect signifying the fact that, okay, I'm going to drink water, and I would utter certain words which would make the other people feel that you're drinking word. However, when the same people had children and they went to some other part of the country, some other part of the globe, for example, they went to Australia or to Russia or to South America, the same process was described by them in a different terminology. The action was the same, but the words that they used to describe them were peculiar, were different. And this is how, just a very, I'm oversimplifying an example, this is how by spreading into various parts of the earth, slowly different languages came into being. And then there was this phenomena that there were certain parent languages, and from those parent languages emerged some daughter languages, some languages which actually came out of them. So Urdu emerged from Arabic, Persian and Turkish. These are the parent languages of the Urdu language. So people who knew Arabic, people who knew Persian, people who knew Turkish, and some of us also say that people who knew Sanskrit, which is a Hindi language. So these are the parent languages of the Urdu language. From those four parental languages, this child language was born. I'm sure this must have been difficult for you, but if your parent is sitting here, she might be able to make you understand later on what I meant to say.
And one thing is England just scored 1-0.
Oh, at the very start.
Question, yes?
So some Muslim men and some Muslim women, they go out with their friends and drink and smoke and go to these places. So my question is, why are they not stopped by doing it, and why does God give us a choice?
Well, this is the way of God. He says that I'm going to reward you or punish you not because I'm going to force you to do something, but because you do it out of your own choice. Because if I force you to do something, then there'll be no purpose of punishing you or rewarding you. It's only when you're going to do it something out of your own choice that you would merit that thing. So if I do something wrong out of my own intention, for example, if I go and drink or do certain other bad things, and this is my own intention, and I have this choice to not to do it as well. So I have this choice to do it, and I have the choice not to do it. So if I exercise restraint, if I exercise control, if I exercise patience, and I stop from doing it out of my own intention, this is something which will actually please God and also show Him that you're actually doing something not because He's forcing you to do something, but because you are doing it out of your choice. So that is why basically God gave us the choice to do whatever we like, and then He said whatever we'll do, it'll have some result, some consequence. But that consequence is going to be based on what you do, and what you do is not going to be based upon my choice, but your own choice.
I actually meant if they are religious.
They're religious.
And they go and do that, and then they come back and they read namaz and they're very religious.
Okay. So what you would like to ask is that in spite of being religious, in spite of praying to God, they still go out and drink, maybe they still go out and do bad things. Well, actually that could have a number of reasons. For example, at times the parents have not been properly communicative to them. They have not been able to communicate the fact that why should people not drink, the reason that they should not drink. At times they suppress the person, they force him not to do so without actually trying to make them understand the reason behind it. So many a time it is because of the harsh behavior of the parents which might be instrumental in that. At other times the child might get into bad company, and instead of being a good person, like the fact that he worships God, he goes to the mosque, but still he is not able to avoid himself from these allurements, from these attractions. So sometimes it happens that in spite of praying, person gets into some bad company, and then that bad company really pulls him along. So this is the time when it is of essential importance that parents should be there to help the child along, and they must also realize that we are people who at the same time can do certain good things and certain bad things. There is no such thing as an angel or a Satan. We are human beings, so we can do bad things and good things at the same time as well, simultaneously. And what we need to do is that we need to increase the percentage of the good things, because the bad things are not going to go away forever, because we are not perfect. They're going to still stay, but the percentage of the good things should be as large as possible.
Thank you. Yes, yes, please. Yes, yes.
Why do we fast?
That's a very good question. And because this is something that you've perhaps just have done last month, I'd like to maybe start off by explaining this question by saying that first of all we need to understand that as human beings we have two planes of existence. One is the body, the other is the soul. So the body gets nourished when you eat food, when you drink Pepsi, when you have a pizza, all sorts of things that nourishes your body. It's a need of your body to grow, and for that particular need you need food, and that particular food that you take is something that which you do all the year round. And then secondly, we also have the soul in us, the soul, the spirit, jisko ab ruh kehte hain. The soul and the spirit basically also needs nourishment, just as the body needs nourishment, which of course is food, which is drinks, which is many other things. In a similar way, the soul inside us also needs that nourishment. Now what happens is that all the year round our physical body and our spiritual body are like this, they are entangled with each other, and more often than not these physical needs, this physical body is actually gripping the spiritual part of the body, so that it's not able to rise and nourish itself. So what happens is that in this 1 month the Almighty stops the physical needs from fulfilling themselves, so that the clasp and the grasp of that physical self is released, and the spiritual part of yourself rises and is able to breathe more freely, and is able to do things that are more uh, more conducive to its development, like for example reading the Quran, for example doing good works. So basically it's a nourishment for your soul which the Almighty provides. That nourishment is there in other parts of the year as well, when you pray, when you do other things. But in the time of Ramadan, what happens is the tussle between the physical self and the spiritual self, which was there all the year round, and more often than not the physical self was actually prevailing on the spiritual self and not letting it come out and breathe, maybe in a manner in which it was hampered. But in Ramadan what happens is that physical self is made to withdraw, so that your physical needs are placed on one side and the spiritual part of your soul emerges, and in which you can actually breathe more freely and nourish and develop it. Now you can ask that what exactly is that spiritual part? That spiritual part is the part in which you are able to make decisions regarding good and wrong. For example, your conscience. Your conscience is not your physical body. It's one of the expressions of your spiritual part. So if you want to become a good human being, if you want your conscience to grow, you want your soul to grow for that. And for your soul to grow, that 1 month actually provides this nourishment in a very unchecked way. The rest of the year, the physical self is always prevailing on the spiritual self. But for that 1 month, that lid is lifted so that the physical self is withdrawn to one side and the spiritual self is able to gain more. So this is an example, just an example to make you show that this is the reason that we fast. We would not have fasted if we would not have had a soul, because eating would have been enough, and because our material self was the only self that needed to be nourished. But since we have a soul, and that soul also needs to be fed, it needs fodder, it needs food, and that Ramadan time is the time in which you can supply it with an ample amount of food. And also another thing that needs to be appreciated is that actually the fast, if you ask me, begins when the Ramadan ends. Because Ramadan itself is a period of a workshop in which you are basically trying to gear up for the next 11 months. So once you have this nourishment of the soul, your real test begins on Eid day, the very next day when Ramadan ends, because now this is a time in which you had nourished your soul in the previous 1 month. Now is the time in which for the next 11 months you're going to see if that nourishment was sufficient for that soul to last the rest of the 11 months. And that is why, precisely why, at times, since this is always not possible, the sensitivity keeps decreasing. It's always a good practice to fast optionally. For example, 2 or 3 fasts in other parts of the other months of the year, each month, so that that tempo remains and that concept remains, and that exercise which persisted for 1 month actually still stays with us for about 2 or 3 days, in which we are able to release that physical self and make that spiritual self rise up. So I am taking this long time to explain this to you, just to let you know that we have to understand that had we been animals who don't have souls, perhaps fasting would have been unnecessary. It has become necessary because that spiritual self needs spiritual fulfillment, and the fasting time is the best way to provide that nourishment.
Thank you. Yes.
Is it compulsory for like a woman or a girl to wear a headscarf? Or
Headscarf.
Right. So regarding headscarf, if you've not made up your hair, like for example your own self, you just combed your hair, not made up your hair, wearing the headscarf is not essential. It's only essential to wear a headscarf when you have embellished your hair, when you've adorned your hair. If you've not adorned your hair, like as I said, just like your own self, you just combed your hair in a simple manner, in that particular case, wearing the headscarf, although might be desirable, it might be good, but it's not compulsory.
so why do some
So the question is why?
wear it?
Why should we wear it?
No, why do some women wear it and some don't?
Well, as I said, you see, what happens is that people try to understand a particular directive by finding out where that directive is placed in the Quran. So there are some people who think that covering the head in all circumstances is mentioned in the Quran, and if you want me to go into reasons, I might have to actually bring up the Quran and maybe on a board show you how verses get interpreted. But in short, what I can say is that I've written on this subject. If you can read this particular answer that I have given, I have compared how people have derived this headscarf in all circumstances, and with the other interpretation in which headscarf is only essential when you are embellishing your hair. So if you could just read through that part and still have questions, I'll be glad to answer them whenever you want to, because I'm available on a phone number, on a WhatsApp number. But it will be good if you could study those verses. I can send you them to your father, and you can just go through them and find out how other people understand those verses and how we have understood those verses, and then you use your own mind, you make up your own mind to understand.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Was Allah created?
Oh, good question. Tough question. Well, you see, every creation has a creator. We don't know that God is the creation or not. You see, just to give you an example, when I look at this chair, I always think of a carpenter, because I know that this chair cannot be made of its own self. It's not an automatic creation. You see, whenever I see things, I see this balloon, I see this wall, I see this window, whatever I see around me, I feel as if there is someone behind, someone who has made them. They would not have come into existence out of their own accord. So, regarding creation, we have to understand that only things which appear to be created by their very form, they need a creator. And about God, since we have yet to see Him, we cannot say that whether He has been created by someone or not. As yet, while being in absentia, we can only say that once we come and meet God, and if He too seems someone as if He has been created by someone, we can then ask this question to Him, that who made you? But till that time, we actually need to understand that every creation needs a creator. Whether God is a creation or not, that's another thing. We never know that He's a creation. Maybe He's someone, as the Quran tells us, that He has always been there. He is since the beginning of time. There was no concept of time and space, yet He was there. So God was always there, and the fact that He was created by someone, this question can only arise if we see God and then we come to the conclusion, well, He cannot have come into existence out of its own accord. Someone might have created Him. And this can only happen once we see God.
It's only 15 minutes left, 4 o'clock, inshallah, we will
Okay.
finish our session. The question, ask them.
I think adults can also ask.
Yeah, adults can ask, but we arrange it for the students.
Okay.
So the children. Children ask.
So the adults are children of their parents.
Yeah.
I've got a very frequent question asked, that why Muslims can marry more than one time. So what's the concept behind it for children?
Right. So first of all, it needs to be understood that as far as a normal ideal family is concerned, it's always because of one father and one mother that a normal ideal family comes into existence. It's only in certain circumstances that this has been allowed to Muslim men, and these circumstances could be that, for example, he might not be getting a child from the first wife. This could be the fact that there are some other women in the society who might need help and they have passed their marriageable age and no one is willing to marry them. It could be because of the fact that the percentage of women in a particular area is much more than that of men. So there could be a number of reasons, but the primary reason would be that there is some need which arises and which basically is something which creates something, which supports some cause. And of course, it could be simply because a person likes someone and he could like 2 or 3 or 4 people. But at the same time, the Quran says that what is essential is that if you think that you are not able to be just to your wives, you have to be outwardly just to all the wives. You, in spite of all your needs, if this justice cannot be exercised, then you cannot marry more than one. And moreover, if in the presence of this justice, even then you cannot exceed a certain number, which is 4. So basically, you need to tell your children that this polygamy or this practice of polygamy is allowed so that a number of issues which exist in the society can be taken care of.
This is not an order.
And also, it's not an obligation. You must understand that it's an option, not an obligation. Because when Muslims actually describe this directive, they say, oh, it's one of our obligations that we have to marry 4 times. So it's not an obligation whatsoever. It's basically an option that you may exercise or you may not.
for the woman?
That is a good question. You see, what happens is that when you create a family, you have to have a single head of the family. You just cannot survive in a family with as two companions. Why? Because you see, at times you have to take decisions. At times there is a deadlock between the father and the mother. So the family which is imagined by Islam and most religions is the one in which the head of the family is the husband. So if you have multiple husbands, you will have multiple wives you'll have multiple heads of the family in a family unit, which is simply not possible. You cannot have 3 or 4 CEOs of the same organization. People will not know to go to which person for a particular job. So that will cause a huge confusion. So had women been the head of the family, had the Almighty thought of the fact that women are more appropriate to be the head of the family, they would have been allowed to have more than one husband, because this addition is basically specific to the head of the family. Whoever is the head of the family should be given this leverage. People who are not the head of the family, if they are given this leverage, they'll end up having more than one heads of family. So since men or husbands are called the head of the family, so therefore it is their prerogative that they can have people or they can have women or wives who are answerable to them or accountable to them. If it had been the other way around, I can safely say that women would have been allowed to marry more than one, the way men are these times. So basically what needs to be understood is that it's the question of the head of the family. The head of the family has to be one. If women are given more husbands than one, then they'll be simultaneously have this problem of having more than one head of the family in each unit, which is of course an unnatural state.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Yes, you.
Coming back to the hijab question, why do women have to wear the hijab when they're reading the Quran or praying, and why don't men have to?
They don't have to.
Not the hijab.
They don't have to.
You cover your head.
They don't have to. You have to wear your normal clothes, normal decent clothes when you are praying. So covering your head during the prayer or while reading the Quran is not at all obligatory. It is more of a cultural practice, which you have seen your mother and your nani or your dadi doing it. Otherwise, it's not something which is actually told to us as an obligation. It's like an etiquette that when you cover your head, when you read the Quran or maybe you read the Salat. But it's not, if you read the Salat, if you read the prayer or the Quran without covering your head, your prayer and reading the Quran would still be valid.
Why do we stone the devil, and why do we have to touch the Kaaba?
Right. See, when you do Hajj, you pelt stones or you stone the devil. This is like a symbolic thing of expressing your hate for the devil, because you see, devil is the eternal enemy of mankind. He leads each person astray. He entices them. He induces them to do bad things. So when you go for Hajj and you pelt stones at the Jamarat, which symbolizes Satan or devil, you are making this commitment that this hate that I have for the devil, by throwing stones at him, I'll maintain that hate when I go back to my own country, to my own city, and whenever the devil or Satan tries to inveigle me, tries to lure me, I have that training in mind that I'm not going to be induced by him. So it's basically a symbolic thing in which your hate for the enemy, for Satan, is there for you whenever you are lured by him in normal circumstances when you go back to him. It's a symbolic expression. It's just a symbolic expression. You are not actually, because that Satan is not there. Of course, it's just a column, it's just a piece of stone, but it is imagined as if he's there, and you're throwing stones at him and giving him this ultimatum that today also I'm not going to come near you and fall for your vices. In my normal life also I'm not going to come near you, but I'm going to pelt with you in my imagination by simply signifying the fact that I'm not going to fall for your traps.
Thank you. Yes.
I was just wondering, why is there the Day of Judgment?
Is going to take place. Why is the Day of Judgment?
Why is there the Day?
Okay, she's asked that why is the Day of Judgment going to take place? So you see, the Day of Judgment basically is a day in which you are able to obtain perfect justice. in this world, the biggest thing that we need as human beings, one of the biggest values that we need is that we should have justice. Now, for example, there could be an instance in which a person ends up killing 100 people. And even if he is caught and killed because of this heinous crime that he did, that is just the fact that he, on the one hand, took 100 lives, and he himself was just, his own life was taken away, and as a result we find that imbalance between, we would not say this is exactly justice, because he killed 100 and in return we're going to just kill that one person. So there are a number of instances in this world in which justice does not take place. Another example would be that you are not able to find a criminal. For example, someone does wrong and he just runs away, and he ends up in some other country, goes there for an asylum or migrates to that place, and then he dies there without get caught. So this would seem that the whole system of this world is based on injustice, because people go free, and at times the other way happens. At times you punish an innocent person, in spite of the fact that the data might be in the favor of that, but the data is not always correct. So at times we end up punishing people who are innocent. At times we end up not being able to catch the individual. At times the court does not have enough evidence to convict a criminal. So this happens that because of our own imperfections, perfect justice cannot be done in this world. And then also there are certain things which you call intentions. We don't know how badly we are thinking about people, while we may be very sweet to them outwardly. So again, we need someone who knows what our intentions are, and God is the only person who knows those intentions. I cannot know what the intentions are. I am not God. So these are the shortcomings or things which make us induce us to the fact that there has to be a day in which perfect justice takes place, and in which all these injustices that people suffered in this world, they are actually taken care of. And the only person that can do this is God himself, because he knows the intentions, he knows the real criminal also, and he also can punish a person in which that punishment is actually equal to the crime that he committed. So in one word, you can say that because justice, perfect justice, is not available in this world, and we would like God to show this justice someday, because if God is not just, then who else is he? So the justice of God is not found in this world. It has to be found someplace else. So that is why the Almighty says that I am going to bring about that day of judgment, in which those injustices which people suffered in this world would no longer be there, and on the day of judgment you will find that perfect justice, which is our desire, which each of us craves for, will be delivered.
I think I've heard on the day of judgment, if there's more bad people have done worse crimes, and there's done more good people, the good people would be killed.
I couldn't guess your question, sorry. Could you rephrase it? If there are more bad people on the day of judgment, and good people also, then it's going to get what? Killed. No. See, the concept of the day of judgment is that when you reach God in the hereafter, what we have done in this world, it shall come before us. It shall be evaluated. It's like a result day. When you have your results, when you go to school, you give an exam, and there is a time when you go and get your result. So the day of judgment will be a day in which you'll get the results of your good or bad deeds. And if you end up having more good deeds, God is going to send you to paradise. And if your bad deeds are more than your good deeds, then God is going to punish you. So it's like that. Basically, it's not that the good people are going to kill the bad people. It's God is going to punish the bad people himself.
Thank you. I think it's going to be the last question from the parent, then we'll finish. Yes, please.
It's following on sort of from, you've sort of answered my question a little bit, talking about how true justice, perfect justice will happen after the day of judgment. But before that, when I think about the people who have suffered injustice, so quite often, like if I think about quite topically, like children quite often will suffer physical or mental abuse,
like handicapped
or
mm-hmm.
other kinds. Why does that happen? Why do they have so much injustice in this world when they're just children?
Actually, what I have understood from the Quran is that injustices which happen to people. For example, they could be born blind, they could be born in a situation in which they are extremely poor, there could be people who are extremely sick, they have terminal cancer, they suffer a lot in this world. So what happens is that basically this world in which you pass through is a temporary world. There is got to be compensation for that, but this serves a twofold purpose. First, it of course tells us that the thing which that person is deprived of, other people are meant to see that and show gratitude to God that they have that. For example, if I see some handicapped child, I thank God by telling him, by expressing my thanks and saying that at least my child is a normal child. So it makes you realize the favors of God. It makes you realize how God has been gracious to you. But as far as that person himself is concerned, for example, if he is a handicapped child, the Almighty, the principle of justice tells us that on the day of judgment or in paradise, this small period of time in which he was in a misery, maybe seemingly in a misery, that shall be more than compensated. It's just a temporary misery that he's going to be through. Once he reaches God, it's going to be much more compensated, and the amount of compensation would be far ahead and far more than the misery that he suffered.
I think nearly time is another one more question and that's it.
Are Muslims allowed to convert to another religion?
They are. They are free. You see, each man is born free. A person can choose his religion. A Christian can become a Muslim can become a Christian, a Muslim can become a Jew, a Muslim can become anything that he wants. That's the practical side of the question. But of course, when you convert from one religion to another, it has to be an intellectual exercise. It has to be. When I gave this answer, that the answer is yes, I was talking about the permissibility. Yes, you are permitted, but then this has to be preceded by certain other things. That why would you want to leave your religion? What is that is bothering you? Maybe there's some directive of the religion that you're not understanding, and that has become a concern for you, or that's taking you away from religion. So yes, you can, but once you do, you must analyze that why you're doing it, so that it doesn't happen that once you do it, you feel that if you want to come back as well, because you had certain questions which were later answered. So conversion itself is allowed. However, it is wise that if you have to convert, then you must actually evaluate your stance very correctly.
Yeah, like would Allah punish you if you were when you pass away?
Well, that is one thing. The other thing is that I find that, for example, some other religion explains the nature of God, the nature of basic questions that come across my mind. Like, for example, why was I born? What's my objective in life? Where will I go once I die? Who is God? How can I connect to God? These are some of the basic questions. Most religions try to answer these questions. So I would go to a new religion if I find answers more convincing. In the case of Islam, the most convincing thing to me is that I find that the word of God, which He communicated to mankind, is there for me in its original language, in its preserved form, and I can communicate to God through that word, which is the Quran. I do not find any other religions taking this claim. I do not find the Hindus saying that we have the final word of God. I do not find any other religion claiming this. The only people who claim this is the Muslims. I'm not saying they're right in this claim, but this is the claim that they make. So I'll test their claim, I'll try to evaluate that claim, because that's a big claim. What in effect I'm saying is that I have the final message of God with me in its original form. So that's something of very much importance to me. I'll try and test that claim, and if I think that they are right in their claim, then I would very much say that this is one of the very, very highly deserving merits on the basis of which you can accept a religion.
Thank you, sir.